So I want to quickly take us into the agenda for the next 90 minutes that we have together. Before I get into the specifics, I just want to give some overarching context that we've really tried to design today to be interactive and engaging. We have almost 100 people already on the line and more joining. And so we're just really grateful to have the expertise and collective brain power here that we want to ultimately leverage to talk about how we can advance equity through community development. So CPI today will be serving as your learning partner, which means that we want to create the conditions to enable you all to learn from each other and form connections that will last moving forward. So we've got a couple sessions today that are going to be interactive and give you a chance to talk with each other. And afterwards, we've curated some opportunities to keep the conversations going and continue it. I'm sorry, people could go on mute if they're not. It's a little bit of a background noise. Okay, I think that's better. Great. But yeah, so we're hoping to make it interactive and really facilitate learning across the board. So to go into the agenda, first up, we've got a warm-up activity in a minute or two, which will give everyone a chance to be welcomed and get the juices flowing. After that, we'll have story time, where we'll start to understand a little bit more what is government legitimacy and how does it apply to advancing equity and community development. For that portion, we'll hear from our excellent panel of speakers, and we'll also have a chance to do breakout rooms for y'all to share learnings with each other. We'll have a short break after that, and then we will come into this session called The Big Picture. So zooming out, why does government legitimacy matter to you, and how can we practically build it in your community? So there'll be a chance for us to hear a little bit from CPI on our perspective, but a big part of this session is really going to be hearing from you in those small breakout room discussion groups where we really try to practically get into how can you build legitimacy and advance equity in your community. Lastly, we will have just some brief closing remarks before we let everyone go today. All right, so with that, I want to take us to our warm-up activity. So we're hoping this is going to be fun and interactive. We've got over 100 people on the call, so it might be a bit chaotic, but what we're going to do here is use the annotate function in Zoom. If you haven't used that before, there's some instructions on the screen, and I'll walk you through it as well. So if you hover your mouse near the top of your screen, you should see a button that says View Options. And if you press that, there'll be a drop-down menu where you can see the button Annotate. And if you click on that, a bar will appear and give you a bunch of different ways that you can ultimately annotate the screen for everyone to see. So stamping is a common one that allows you to put a heart or a star on the screen so that others can view it as well. And how we're going to use this annotate tool is for everyone who is joining from Zoom is to give us the chance to tell us where you're joining from. I think we're going to have people joining from all over the US and even beyond. So we'd love for you to use the annotate function to show us where in the world you're joining from. So if we head to the next slide, you'll see, that's it, someone's using the annotate function, great. You'll see we've got two maps here. If you're joining from the US, you can place a heart, a star, let us know where you're at. We've also got an international map on the right there for people who might be joining from outside the US. Oh, this is awesome. We've got Texas represented, the Midwest as well. Looks like the UK as well, joining us for the evening. Love it. And also, if you're having any trouble with the annotate function, or if you're joining us from Facebook Live, just feel free to use the chat, say hi, tell us where you're coming from. But this is really great to see. We've got people joining us from all over. All right, I'm going to give people another 10 seconds or so. It looks like we've got people from the oceans, even from the slide. It's all over the place. But no, it's just really exciting to have so many people in the same virtual room who are really passionate about equity, about community development, and about building legitimacy. So we're looking forward to learning together with all of you how we can better build legitimacy in our communities. All right. With that, I think I want to take us to our story time section, where we're going to start out with a panel of really excellent speakers who will tell us a little bit more about what legitimacy looks like to them and share some stories of what it looks like in practice. So if we jump ahead to the next slide, you'll see our amazing panel of speakers. First, we have Hannah Lebovitz, who is joining us as an assistant professor of public affairs at the University of Texas, Arlington. Her research interests relate to human-centered sustainability issues in urban and metropolitan context. Hannah is amazing. We're thrilled to have you today. Welcome, Hannah. Thank you for joining us. Next, we have Jorge Fanjul. Jorge leads the government legitimacy portfolio here at CPI in North America. He brings over 10 years of professional experience in several roles in New York City's local government, working on a wide variety of initiatives, including some really exciting civic engagement ones. And last, but certainly not least, Laura mentioned before, but we're really lucky today to be joined by Maggie Jones. She is the Assistant Director of Community Development for Tarrant County, Texas. She has over 12 years in public service, where she's done a whole range of things, including challenging the way things have always been done in an effort to improve the lives of others. So welcome, Maggie, Jorge, Hannah. We're really thrilled to have you joining us here today. Our first question for the group, we want to hear from everyone in the panel here, is what is government legitimacy and why does it matter to you? For this one, I'd like to start with Jorge. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about what government legitimacy is and why it matters?
Well, thank you, John. First, I just want to welcome everyone again on behalf of our panel. It's really an honor to be here and to have so many of you interested in discussing government legitimacy. I'll get personal for a moment. I'll say government legitimacy to me started early on in my career when I was a young chief of staff in New York City, and I was called on a community resident that actually had been murdered, a young mother that had been gunned down. She had been the witness of a crime and knew about some criminal activity. She had an order of protection. Unfortunately, the police were not able to protect her, and she'd been gunned down. And it happened actually a day before Thanksgiving. I ended up writing about this for the Center of Public Impact, and I found that for me, I was in my 20s at that point, and the community just saw this was a strongly working class community, minority community, and they felt that government had forgotten them. They felt that this woman had come forward with information, and she was not able to be protected by the police. And the community was just in arms. And there were NYPD community relations officers, but they didn't have the credibility that the elected officials had. And being the chief of staff to the local council member, I had to really step up. And I had to really engage with this family, engage with this community, and really show the compassion in government that oftentimes I think gets lost. And for those of us on this call that have done similar work or have worked with communities, you may know what I'm talking about when you oftentimes have to be the shoulder that a community member has to cry on, that a constituent has to cry on because they don't have anywhere else to go. And that for me was just a really, really transformational story that I carried with me on, well, what was government legitimacy? I was called upon to help 4 children that now had lost a mother and be able to bring those government services to them. So it was incredibly just transformational in just how I saw government. And when I went into government really wanting to change the world, and Washington DC was too far, so I thought, okay, city hall, local government, that's where I'm going to go. And I did. And then a couple of years in for this to happen, it really, really brought me to, well, what is, and I didn't even realize like I was engaged in a legitimacy exercise. I just thought we were doing the right thing, and this was the right thing that we had to do. So for me, government legitimacy is government really connecting with community, doing the right thing, understanding how to listen rather than how to act. All too often, government pushes edicts and policy down onto community it's an exercise almost in positional power oftentimes in government, when it really should be an exercise in co-design, co-creation, and community power. So for me, all of those ideas have come to really formulate my idea of government legitimacy, John.
Thank you so much for sharing, Jorge. That's a really powerful story and just shows the importance of connecting to community. I would love to hear from Hannah next, how you'd like to build on that and kind of share what government legitimacy means to you.
Yeah, so I got my start in the same way Jorge did, which is hilarious. We didn't even know, but I worked for the city of New York as well. And I think there's something about working in city government when you first start out, or county government, these much closer to people kind of levels of government, where you really get this sense of what legitimacy is. Because I think that only being with people and seeing their experiences on the ground and seeing them really need government on literally the worst day of their lives, right? Like Jorge pointed out, that's when people need us the most. And understanding that all the work that goes into everything before that day, that's the legitimacy work. So that when people need us in that exact moment, we are there, we are ready, and we're able to be ready in a way that not only helps them today, but doesn't further marginalize them down the road. One of my biggest concerns when it comes to government legitimacy is the way that we can further criminalize people, let's say based on poverty, when they enter into governmental systems. And I, along with my work experience, a lot of my research background has been very formative in this. So reading books about, how our governmental systems and especially our tech governmental systems can profile people and police people based on poverty. So things like that, that's also part of the legitimacy effort. So it's all the work that goes in before people have the worst day of their lives, and all the work that goes in to make sure they never have that day again. To me, that's legitimacy. And I don't take for granted that government has that or engages in that. I think that sometimes as a professor of public policy or government, the first thing people say to me is, oh, you must love government. And I think it's actually almost the opposite. I'm probably the biggest critic of government because I'm the one who understands so many of these systems and what's going on underneath them. And you get to a point where you almost intuitively know which systems are going to mess over which populations. And it's up to you to advocate, for change. But I think, like I said, that legitimacy is everything that has to go into that. So it's accountability, it's transparency, it's participation, it's, radical democracy. To ensure that when people need government, it's there, and the use of that system doesn't further hurt them.
Thank you so much for sharing, Hannah. I think that's really powerful to think about some of those critical values of accountability and openness. And I think being a critic of government so that the systems can be designed to better work for communities is a really powerful perspective. So appreciate you sharing. Would now love to hear from Maggie. What else would you add?
Sure. So first and foremost, I need to give a shout out to Matt Andrews and Ricardo Hausman at the Harvard Kennedy School for my answer, because before the Leading Economic Growth program about 10 weeks ago, I would have likely answered this question quite differently. So they take it and they break it up just a little bit. So they first talk about legitimacy being where we're building and maintaining support for what we're doing with our authorizers, right? So your community, the people you serve, your elected officials, your partners, regardless of whether it's functional or not. And a lot of time we spend so much time and effort on this side. So maybe you're still getting council approval for the programs that look amazing on paper, but maybe they aren't having the positive impact that they could or should, but nobody's calling and nobody's complaining and you're still spending money. And so from the outside, it looks like what you're doing is good work. So then functionality is where we start doing what we're doing is working, and we're working to solve the problem. And you're not going to solve the problem by just copying and pasting what some community did to solve their version of the problem. You're going to solve that problem by catering it to your specific context. And these are really big, complex problems, right? We're talking about housing, we're talking about transportation, we're talking about infrastructure. And to highlight that, I was talking with a friend of mine who she's in Mississippi, and we were talking yesterday about her community development work and some of her challenges. And right off the bat, I started saying, oh, well, try this, try that. And the more we started digging into her situation and we realized, okay, wait, these are way two completely different situations. So here in Texas, we have incredibly rapid growth. Her population has declined significantly. I can't find land for the life of me, and she alternatively has a ton of it. And so our problems and the root of these problems are incredibly different. And we have to keep that in mind when we're determining what is functional in our different contexts. And so the challenge really becomes here is finding the balance between the two. So authorization for your functional work. And as Matt always reminded us, and I actually have a sticky note on my computer that says this, as success is not legitimacy or functionality, that success is both. And so why does it matter? Because it has to matter. And if government is neither legitimate nor functional, then where does that leave our community? And so often the views that we have to face are that we aren't legitimate and that we're not functional. But what a wonderful opportunity it is to flip that around.
Wow, thank you so much, Maggie. I absolutely love that combination of functionality and legitimacy is what leads to impact. So thank you so much for sharing. And I think we already heard a little bit of some stories and examples, but for this next question, I'd love to get more specific. We've got a high level understanding of what legitimacy is and why it matters, but let's hear some stories. Let's try to understand from your experiences in community development, what are some practical stories where you've seen what government legitimacy looks like? This can be a success or also a failure. Feel free to share what you're comfortable with and you think the group will learn from. So let's go in reverse order this time. Maggie, would love to give it back to you.
Sure. So do we have to call it failure, right? So can we call it learning instead, please? So one of my favorite economic development, community development stories, which is now more than a decade old, but it's stories like this that totally keep me going. It's from my city days. And when our department director, who's now an assistant city manager, and I went to go talk to a particular homeowners association about a proposed workforce housing development. And they were a bit raw about it, let's be honest. And at some point during the evening, we completely abandoned the slide deck that we had prepared and we opted for a conversation instead. And one of the most basic needs, right, is the need to be heard and to be understood. And if you're talking to someone versus with someone, especially in a situation where these lives would be impacted in one way or another, if you're talking at them, you're at risk of taking that basic need away. And what we found during those really hard conversations was there were so many misconceptions about the proposal that had raised alarm. And it's really easy sometimes to just sweep it under the rug and say, no, we're going to do this thing. But instead, we started to dig deeper into those concerns in their context. But we wouldn't have been able to do that had we continued our set course. So instead of steering away from the opposition, think about what you might be able to learn from them instead. So changing that trajectory of failure, because we would totally have bombed that conversation, but turn it into more of a learning and therefore success is fantastic. And I think there's so often this argument that comes up about, well, we don't have time. But at the end of the day, my bet is if you put the time in up front and you put that investment up front, that it's absolutely going to pay dividends later. And not to mention you're designing a program or a building or an initiative for someone, right? Or some body or a community or a neighborhood. And so it should absolutely work in that context.
Thank you, Maggie. Yeah, I love the framing of failure as learning. What we can learn from failure and fail forward is critical. And I think that story really brings it to life. And the idea of speaking with and not to, I think, is really critical takeaway as well. Hannah, I'd love to hear from you next, a story from your experiences of building legitimacy through community development.
Sure. Yeah. So I saw we've got a bunch of Cuyahoga County people here. Hi, everybody. So I used to live in Cuyahoga County. That's in Northeast Ohio. And I think a great example of this is Maple Heights in Northeast Ohio in Cuyahoga County. Really, great suburb that used to be pretty much a middle income suburb, right outside Inner Ring, right outside of the city of Cleveland. And over time, what we've seen with a lot of different suburbs is that it's really shifted very significantly in demographics. So used to be mostly white, middle income, now mostly Black and poor. And for years, the administration of the city refused to admit that the city needed anything, any kind of community development work. The city was run mostly by people who did not look like the population, did not have the population's best interests at heart. And there was a very strong focus on sort of this thing that we used to be and bringing that back, as opposed to the people that currently live there for whom the city actually works. Well, it obviously wasn't working. And with the election of Mayor Annette Blackwell, the first woman and the first Black person, so we got a double whammy there. There was just a massive change in the city. And a lot of it came down to the language that needed to be used in that area. Thinking about centering justice, centering historic harms, restoring that justice to the people who were ignored for all of those years. Really, really discussing the issues at hand as opposed to walking around them with coded language. And that's a huge part of legitimacy. Residents are not stupid. They know when their government is gaslighting them. They know when their government is not speaking to the issues that are there. In fact, residents are more intelligent and more thoughtful about their city than government often is, because they live it. It's their everyday lives. They have their lived experiences that show them what being in that city really means. Government can think the city is all the things that it knows from behind the scenes, but residents understand what's actually being produced and what the outcomes are. And so the city really had a big struggle to gain back that legitimacy, but the language was so key. Speaking of the historic harms, publicly being open about what needed to be done in that community, speaking on behalf of the residents instead of as opposed to the residents. These are really important elements of legitimacy that I think, unfortunately, many local governments do not really tackle head on. Instead, they'll talk about, things in very vague language. We'll use words like equity and justice and diversity, but never really get at what those are. And we don't often tie policy and legislation to those initiatives. We don't say things like, people in this city couldn't buy homes. Now we're going to help them be able to buy homes. Like, that statement needs to be said, as opposed to, we're going to do a great community development initiative. Probably a lot of people will want to live here, right? You need to speak to who is there, why they couldn't have what they need, and how you're going to make that accessible.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing, Hannah. I think that is just an incredible story of Mayor Blackwell and Maple Heights, and really speaks to the power of lived experience and how do you really get specific about what you're going to do, as opposed to sticking to the broad buzzwords. So really appreciate that example. And now I want to hand it over to Jorge for him to share a story.
Thank you, John. If I can, I'm going to kind of tie together a couple of threads that both Maggie and Hannah shared in their stories, because I think it's very true in my personal story of where I saw that I was on the wrong side of history. To your first question, I felt like I was on the right side of history, helping this family going through a terrible tragedy on the worst day of their lives. Now, probably one of the biggest black eyes I ever received while at City Hall was when I was given the project of expanding a business improvement district. So this is in the economic development space. And we thought this was a great idea. We had brought in the best management consultants, the best, I'm talking like Harvard MBA, we're gonna do PowerPoint decks, and we're gonna do key results and all of this wonderful stuff. And we thought we had this great team to expand this business district from what was a more thriving community to a more depressed socioeconomic community. What we didn't do was really check the pulse of the community on this. And they immediately went to their progressive enclaves and their progressive leaders. And they said, wait, this is big business, essentially trying to gentrify and displace us. And I was there thinking, well, okay, but this is good. This is good for you. We've got all the data. We've got all the numbers. We're doing the community events. We're informing you. We're telling you what all the good that's going to come. And ultimately, I realized that the team that we had didn't look like the community, I think I was the only person of color actually on that team, and along with my boss at the time was a Latina city council member, but the people running the day-to-day operation were not from there. And I think that's a thread that you heard with both Maggie and Hannah's story. Like, constituents are not dumb. They do get when you're basically trying to throw the wool over their eyes. And oftentimes I think what happens is in our space, as people involved in community and economic development, as people involved in policy, as government leaders, is we don't think about that community space. We don't think about those community voices. We think we do because we're informing them, but we're not co-designing with them. We're not co-ideating with them. And then you get to a point where a project is off the rails. And in this case, the business improvement district never happened. And unfortunately, what did happen was big box stores came in anyway, and the business improvement district was not there to actually push back against them. And we did not do a great job in that instance. And I certainly own it. I did not do a great job in that instance of practicing what I now preach and getting to the right community members, bringing them in, being able to co-ideate with them and explaining, hey, actually pulling together this group of community leaders into this expansion of this business district would actually give you more agency and more voice against these big box stores. So I failed them, and it's something that I certainly carry with me to this day. And but from that, there was an opportunity, as Maggie said, to learn. And I promised I would never do that again. And and when we get into exactly how we look a little bit later, we talk about how we'll be talking about how government legitimacy looks and how CPI here at the Center for Public Impact, we look at it. It very much speaks to that point. And I think it's what Maggie and Hannah are also saying. Folks know better. And if you give them a raw deal, they're going to pick up it's a raw deal. If you, however, come to a conclusion with them and make them partners, treat them with the respect and the dignity that ultimately a legitimate government should be treating its constituents with, you're going to get better outcomes, and you're going to be able to tackle really difficult issues in a more equitable way.
Thank you, Jorge. I really appreciate your vulnerability and just honesty in sharing that experience and how you learned from it. And I think, a lot of great comments in the chat here, just reinforcing the importance of really sharing power with the community so that those voices are represented, heard, and reflected in the actions that are taken. So thank you so much, Hannah, Jorge, Maggie. These are really insightful remarks to get us on the same page in terms of what legitimacy is and how it helps us advance equity within our communities. Now we're excited to hear from all of you. As I said up front, we at CPI want to be your learning partner today. And so this next portion will be all about discussions and exchanging stories with each other. So in just a minute, we're about to go into breakout rooms where you'll have the chance to share a story of government legitimacy from your work in community development. And just a quick piece of context before we do that is that we really encourage you to be candid and honest as you're sharing in these breakout rooms. This won't be recorded. We'll keep Chatham House rules, which means we'll take notes and capture the insights, but we will not share anything that will be attributed to you. It will all stay anonymous. And we're really trying to do that so that we encourage you to really be honest so that we can all learn together. And so in these breakout rooms, you'll have a CPI facilitator who will help guide the discussion and will provide instructions when we get there. So thank you so much to our panel. And with that, I think we can dive into the breakout rooms.
So again, my name is Jorge Fanjul. I'm the Program Director for Government Legitimacy at the Center for Public Impact. I just want to thank all of you for joining us today, and our partners at NACED and Maggie and Hannah for just being incredible panelists. And I really think the insights and learning we were able to discuss probably only skim the surface and how much more we could unpack if we had more time. I know here at the Center for Public Impact, we believe that serving as a learning partner in support of local governments and communities to dismantle inequitable power dynamics and enable community-driven change really is a main focus that we work on as we look to reimagine governments to be more legitimate for the people that we serve. Democracy really depends on it. And I think based on what many of us heard in these breakout rooms, we all realize we are at an inflection point where this stuff matters right now, and it's real. And we're all empowered, whether we're members of the community on this webinar or whether we're government leaders or first responders. We are the ones that have the beautiful and exhausting privilege of making the change and really impacting the lives of people in a better way. So here at the Center for Public Impact, to better fulfill our commitment to this mission, we're proposing an offshoot of this webinar to help further impact the work that we all do by unpacking some of the ideas we discussed today. And we're announcing the new creation of a learning cohort program on earned legitimacy. And this 3-month opportunity will work with municipal partners, many of you, to understand the unique challenges and opportunities inherent in government and community. We will also bring together community partners, hopefully many of you will also join, that are community leaders and CBO leaders, to serve as trusted validators. The cohort will be made up of local government staff and community leaders, again, as the local actors along with foundations and academia. And what we'll be doing is facilitating knowledge leaders all within this space. So imagine what we did today, just really a lot bigger, a lot broader, and being able to hyper focus on local issues and connecting, as we said in the breakout rooms, folks from the East Coast, the West Coast, everywhere in between, folks internationally, on the good work that we'll be doing here jointly. So we really invite you, if you enjoyed this webinar, to fill out the statement of interest that we will share with you via this Zoom poll, and really to participate in this cohort. We'll be reaching out to everyone that indicates interest shortly after this webinar. And we're excited to really continue this conversation because I think many of us realize that we can do better. I certainly realized that I could do better in my career. And that's why I came here to the Center for Public Impact, because I realized being in government was only going to, again, just skim the surface of the real impact that I could make. And I saw government work well. I saw government fail. And some of the most powerful stories that you're going to get is on those failures. And as Maggie and Hannah said earlier, those failures, if we can turn them into learning opportunities, now that's a win for everybody. That's a win for government. That's a win for community. And that's a win for the people that really rely on us to do right by them. So thank you so much for everyone for joining us today. We appreciate you. We hope that this workshop serves as the beginning of a bigger conversation around equity and legitimacy in our communities. After this event, again, we will share a short feedback survey along with an interest form about our upcoming Earned Legitimacy cohort. And we'll give you a chance to register for additional opportunities to continue this conversation. Again, thank you to our panelists, Maggie, Hannah, Laura at NASED. What an incredible organization and what an incredible partner to do this with. Thank you, everybody, and have a great rest of your day and a wonderful rest of your week. Thank you.